Imagine yourself in the midst of an emotional storm. Anxiety is mounting. Thoughts are racing. Your heart is pounding in your chest. Now imagine being able to view the storm not as something that controls you, but as a phenomenon that you can learn and navigate with wisdom and balance. This is the promise of Stoic temperance, not the suppression of emotions, but the art of feeling with moderation and purpose. Welcome to another practical philosophical journey on our channel. Today, we'll explore one of the four cardinal virtues of Stoicism that has the potential to profoundly transform your relationship with your emotions and actions. Temperance. In a world where we are constantly bombarded with stimuli, where anxiety has become epidemic, and where attention is fragmented by countless distractions, temperance emerges not as a philosophical relic, but as a vital tool for our psychological survival. It represents the balance we all seek between feeling deeply and acting wisely. This video is not just a theoretical exposition. What we will share in the following sections are principles and practices that the Stoics developed over 2,000 years ago, but that have been confirmed by modern psychology as fundamental to robust mental health. We will see how temperance can become a pillar in your journey to deal with anxiety, depression, and relationship challenges. By the end of this exploration, you will have concrete tools to begin cultivating this virtue in your daily life. Because as Epictetus said, first learn the meaning of what you say and then speak it. Stoic philosophy is not just to be understood, but to be lived in every breath, every choice, every moment of calm found amidst the storms of life. Get ready to discover how the virtue of temperance can be your safe haven in a world of excess and imbalance. Before we begin, subscribe to our channel to continue receiving valuable content like this. Let's begin this journey together, one step at a time, toward a life of greater balance and inner peace. Definition of temperance in Stoic philosophy. Temperance, or sophrosyne in ancient Greek, carries with a meaning far deeper than our modern understanding of simple moderation. For the Stoics, it represented an inner harmony, a state of order and balance that permeates all human existence. It is a virtue that teaches us not only when to stop, but also when to begin, not only how to restrain, but also how to express. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism in the 3rd century BC, conceived of temperance as a form of self-knowledge that allows us to discern between necessary and unnecessary desires. Epictetus would later describe it as the virtue that teaches us to use things as they should be used, while Seneca characterized it as the force that restrains all the disorderly movements of soul. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, wrote in his Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not over external events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This phrase captures the essence of Stoic temperance. It's not about controlling the uncontrollable, but about governing our responses to what happens. It's crucial to understand that, unlike other philosophical or religious traditions, Stoicism did not view temperance as repression. It wasn't about denying emotions or avoiding pleasure. Instead, Stoic temperance was about experiencing emotions and pleasures appropriately, without them overpowering our ability to reason and choose. This view differs subtly from Epicurean temperance, which focused on maximizing pleasure through reducing desires, or from Aristotle's view, which sought the golden mean between extremes. For the Stoics, temperance was intrinsically linked to their view of human nature as fundamentally rational. Our capacity for reason, when perfected by temperance, allows us to live in accordance with nature, the highest good in Stoic ethics. The Stoics considered temperance a cardinal virtue, precisely because it underpins all the others. Without temperance, courage can become rashness, justice can turn into dogmatic rigidity, and wisdom can degenerate into mere accumulation of knowledge without practical application. Temperance is the fertile soil in which all the other virtues can flourish. In our contemporary society, where overconsumption is normalized and instant gratification is celebrated, temperance may seem old-fashioned, yet it is precisely this countercultural quality that makes it so valuable today. In a world that constantly pushes us toward extremes, overwork, over-entertainment, over-information, temperance invites us to find the balance our psyches naturally seek. When we truly understand Stoic temperance, we realize that it does not limit our lives, it expands them. By freeing us from the tyranny of momentary impulses and insatiable desires, temperance makes room for a richer, fuller experience of existence. As the Stoic paradox suggests, it is only through moderation that we can experience the true abundance of life. The Stoic distinction between what we can and cannot control. Some things are within our control, while others are not. With these seemingly simple words, Epictetus established what is perhaps the most transformative principle of Stoicism, the dichotomy of control. This fundamental distinction is not just an intellectual exercise, but a practical foundation upon which temperance is built. What is within our control? According to Stoics, only our own attitudes, judgments, desires, aversions, and, to some extent, our actions. Everything else, reputation, wealth, physical health, the behavior of others, world events, is beyond our direct control. This separation is not merely theoretical. It is an essential first step toward cultivating temperance in an unpredictable world. When we truly internalize this distinction, something remarkable happens. Our emotional energy is redirected. Instead of wasting life force and frustration against the inevitable or anxiety about the uncertain, we focus our attention on the only domain where we have genuine authority, our own character and responses. Imagine being stuck in traffic. A person without the Stoic discernment might become consumed with rage, complaining about something they can't change, raising their blood pressure, and ruining their mood for the rest of the day. The person practicing temperance, informed by the dichotomy of control, recognizes that traffic is beyond their power. Instead of fighting this reality, they direct their attention to what they can control, how to use this unexpected time, perhaps by listening to an audiobook, their attitude cultivating patience, and their physiological response taking deep breaths. This practice is not passive resignation. Rather, it is an active engagement with reality on its own terms. As Cleanthes wrote, "Lead me, Zeus, and you, Destiny. Wherever you have ordered me to go, I will follow without hesitation. But even if, becoming wicked, I refuse, I will still follow you." This is the essence of the Stoics' active temperance, accepting what we cannot change, yet still participating fully in life. In our daily lives, this distinction plays out constantly. When a colleague makes a critical comment, we cannot control their words, but we can control our interpretation and response. When we face an illness, we cannot control the diagnosis, but we can control how we relate to it. When we lose someone we love, we cannot control the loss, but we can control how we honor their memory through our actions. The beauty of this approach is that it frees us from an exhausting attempt to control the uncontrollable, a major cause of anxiety and frustration in modern life. By focusing our energy on what is genuinely within our power, we not only increase our effectiveness, but also find a form of inner peace that is independent of external circumstances. Temperance, viewed through this lens, becomes not just an exercise in self-control, but an expression of self-knowledge and practical wisdom. It is a humble recognition of our limits, combined with a determination to cultivate excellence within those limits. And so, paradoxically, by accepting what we cannot control, we significantly expand our sense of agency and inner freedom. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. This observation, often attributed to psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, but which perfectly captures the essence of Stoic practice, introduces us to the realm of concrete techniques for developing temperance in our daily lives. The first and perhaps most fundamental of these techniques is what we might call the Stoic pause. When faced with a provocative situation, whether an annoying email, an offensive comment, or an unexpected disappointment, the Stoics practice a habit of consciously pausing before reacting. During this pause, however brief, we regain our ability to choose. Epictetus advised, "Remember that it is not he who offends or harms you who harms you, but your opinion about these things." Pausing allows us to question this automatic opinion before it governs our response. In practice, this might mean counting to 10 before responding to provocation, delaying sending a text message in an emotional state, or simply consciously observing your breath for a few moments when intense feelings arise. This pause is not repression. It is the space where temperance is born. Another powerful technique is premeditatio malorum, or negative visualization. Paradoxically, by regularly contemplating potential adversities, from minor inconveniences to major losses, we develop a dual resilience. gratitude for the present, and emotional preparedness for potential hardships. As Seneca advised, he who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary. By briefly visualizing how we would respond with temperance to challenging situations, we are mentally practicing emotional balance. The detached observer exercise complements these practices by teaching us to observe our own emotions with compassionate curiosity without completely identifying with them. Marcus Aurelius practiced this regularly. Observe a movement of the mind as if it were a separate part of you. When anxiety arises, for example, we might notice, there is anxiety present now, rather than I am anxious, a subtle but profound distinction that creates space for temperance. Socratic self-talk is also an essential tool. When turbulent emotions arise, we can engage in compassionate self-inquiry. Why am I feeling this so intensely? What am I afraid of? Is this the only possible interpretation? What would a wise person do in this situation? This dialogue is not self-criticism, but self-exploration, the kind of self-talk that cultivates temperance. To anchor these practices in daily life, the Stoics use physical reminders. Today, we can adapt this idea by using discrete alerts on our phones with phrases like respond, don't react, or pause and choose, or symbolic objects that remind us of our commitment to temperance, a ring, a bracelet, or a stone in our pocket that we touch in moments of emotional challenge. Finally, journaling our emotional responses, similar to what Marcus Aurelius practiced in his meditations, allows us to identify patterns and progress. Some helpful questions to ask yourself include: what situations provoked intense emotional responses today? How did I respond? Was I able to create space between stimulus and response? What could I do differently next time? Taken together, these techniques are not intended to eliminate emotions, a common misunderstanding about Stoicism, but rather develop a more conscious and balanced relationship with our emotional lives. As Epictetus observed, it is not what happens to you, but how you respond to it that matters. Stoic temperance is precisely this ability to respond to life's circumstances with balance, discernment, and inner integrity. As we practice these techniques, we gradually discover that temperance is not just an abstract virtue, but a living capacity that develops through daily exercise, like a muscle that grows stronger with regular use. And like any valuable practice, its benefits extend far beyond the personal domain, profoundly transforming how we relate to others. Human relationships are perhaps the most rigorous and revealing test of our capacity for temperance. It is relatively easy to maintain balance when we are alone. It is in the complex dance of human interactions that our temperance is truly tested and perfected. Temperance in relationships begins with something seemingly simple but profoundly transformative: authentic listening. When we truly listen to someone, not just waiting for our turn to speak or mentally formulating our next response, we are practicing a profound form of temperance. This listening requires that we restrain the impulse to dominate, to correct, to interrupt. Zeno observed, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. Temperance listening creates a sacred space where understanding can flourish. Equally important is measured and thoughtful speech. The Stoics were particularly attentive to words, recognizing their power to heal or wound. Epictetus advised, remember that silence is sometimes the best answer. When we speak temperately, our words are economical but precise, kind but truthful, timely and proportionate to the situation. Ask yourself, is this observation necessary? Is it true? Is it beneficial? Is it the right time? This practice of temperate speech can profoundly transform our relationships. During conflicts, where temperance is most needed and most challenging, the Stoics offers a valuable guiding principle: distinguish the person from their behavior. As Epictetus taught, when someone irritates you, know that it is your own opinion that irritates you. By remembering that people act according to their current understanding of life, their past wounds, and their often unconscious beliefs, we can maintain temperance even in the face of provocation. This does not mean tolerating hurtful behavior, but responding to it with balanced clarity rather than emotional reactivity. Empathy, far from being a capitulation or weakness, is actually a sophisticated expression of temperance. It requires us to temporarily moderate our own perspective in order to genuinely understand another person's experience. Marcus Aurelius practiced this regularly. When you wake up in the morning, think of the precious privilege of being alive, of breathing, of thinking, of enjoying, of loving. This same reverence for shared human experience allows us to practice tempered empathy in relationships. The Stoics also warn us against making hasty judgment about others, a form of mental intemperance that often poisons relationships. Epictetus asked, "Are you prepared to judge another person's side of the story when you are unwilling to examine your own?" Temperance invites us to suspend judgment, recognizing the inevitable bias of our perspective and the limitations of our knowledge of other people's motivations. Paradoxically, temperance in relationships also manifests itself through the establishment of healthy boundaries. As Seneca observed, associate with those who can improve you. Receive those whom you can improve yourself. The process is mutual. People learn as they teach. Moderation teaches us when to say yes and when to say no, when to draw closer and when to create distance, always with the goal of honoring both our integrity and the dignity of the other. In romantic relationships, temperance is expressed as a balance between closeness and autonomy, between surrender and self-determination. In family relationships, which are often fraught with old and complex dynamics, temperance helps us respond to the present without being dominated by past patterns. In professional relationships, temperance allows us to collaborate effectively even with people whose approaches and personalities differ significantly from our own. Consistently applying temperance to our relationships not only improves these specific connections, but gradually transforms our social experience as a whole. We find that we can navigate the complex territory of human relationships with more grace and less friction, maintaining our inner peace even in challenging interactions. And perhaps most importantly, we begin to see that true temperance never isolates us from others, but connects us more deeply to our shared humanity. The paradox of moderation, one of the most persistent misunderstandings about Stoicism, and particularly about the virtue of temperance, is the idea that it leads to an emotionally flat life, devoid of passion and joy. Nothing could be further from the truth. Stoic temperance embodies a fascinating paradox. It is precisely through moderation that we experience our emotions most fully and authentically. To understand this paradox, we must first clarify what temperance is not. It is not the suppression of emotions, nor the denial of our sensitive nature. The Stoics never advocated a robotic or apathetic existence. As Seneca wrote, the wise man is not free from emotions, but he experiences them differently. This difference is crucial. It is a qualitative change in our relationship to emotional experience, not its elimination. The Stoics made a fundamental distinction between what they called passions, pathos, excessive, irrational, and disturbing emotions, and appropriate emotions, eupathii. Emotional responses that are in line with nature and reason. Temperance does not eliminate the capacity to feel. It refines this capacity, allowing for a more conscious and balanced emotional experience. Consider the difference between tempered joy, chara, and unbridled ecstasy, between prudent caution, eulabia, and paralyzing fear, between natural belasis and obsessive desire. In each case, the tempered version is no less intense at its core, just more in line with our rational nature, and therefore more sustainable and less disruptive. This paradox becomes even clearer when we examine difficult emotions. Without temperance, sadness can turn into debilitating despair, anger into destructive rage, desire into all-consuming obsession. These extreme versions, far from representing a more complete or authentic emotional experience, actually narrow and distort our experience. As Marcus Aurelius pointed out, reject the satisfaction that comes from anger, from sadness, from fear, from indignation. All are violent and contrary to reason. Temperance expands our capacity to feel by freeing us from a tyranny of automatic reactions and momentary impulses. When we are not dominated by every passing emotion, we can choose to respond with a full range of possibilities, not just our habitual patterns. This is a paradoxical kind of emotional freedom that comes not from indulgence but from moderation. Perhaps the most surprising aspect of this paradox is that temperance often intensifies our experience of pleasure and joy. As Epicurus, though no Stoic, wisely observed, it is not continual drinking and feasting, nor the enjoyment of boys and women, nor of fish and other delicacies from a sumptuous table that produce a happy life, but sober reasoning, When we learn to appreciate ordinary experiences with mindfulness and gratitude, a habit cultivated through temperance, we discover a depth of satisfaction that excessive consumption or frenetic pursuit of stimulation can never provide. Contemporary literature on positive psychology confirms this ancient Stoic wisdom. The ability to regulate emotions, not suppress them, is directly correlated with greater well-being and life satisfaction. Temperance allows us to inhabit the space between repression and indulgence, finding a third path that honors both our emotional nature and our capacity for conscious choice. Stoic philosophy has always been, above all, a practical philosophy, not an abstract system for academic contemplation, but a set of daily exercises designed to transform ordinary life into a work of excellence. As Musonius Rufus, the Roman Socrates, put it, just as physicians do not benefit their patients by speaking well of medicine, but only by curing them, so a philosopher does not benefit people by speaking fine words, but only by guiding their souls from ignorance to wisdom. In this pragmatic spirit, let's explore concrete Stoic exercises for cultivating temperance in everyday life. The Stoic day traditionally begins with a morning examination, a time of quiet reflection to anticipate the challenges of the day ahead and mentally prepare to face them with temperance. This exercise, which can take as little as 5 minutes, involves visualizing potentially difficult situations and planning balanced responses. Today, I may encounter a traffic jam. If that happens, I will use this time to practice patience, not as a passive resignation, but as an active choice. By anticipating challenges to temperance, we significantly reduce the likelihood of being caught off guard by impulsive reactions. Complementary to this is a nightly examination, an honest inventory of how we practice temperance during the day. Seneca practiced this religiously. When a light goes out and my wife is silent, I examine my entire day and review my actions and words. I hide nothing from myself. I ignore nothing. Some helpful questions for this exercise include: when was I able to maintain balance today? When were the moments of intemperance? What have I learned? How can I do better tomorrow? This is not an exercise in self-punishment, but in growing awareness, the foundation of temperance. The practice of voluntary abstinence was highly valued by the Stoics as an exercise in strengthening temperance. Seneca regularly advised living for a few days in such a way that no one would despise such a life, wearing rough clothes, sleeping on hard ground, eating plain food. In modern life, we can adapt this principle through small acts of temporary renunciation. Perhaps a day without social media, a deliberately simple meal amid abundance, or choosing to spend an evening without electronic entertainment. These periods of voluntary abstinence teach us that we can be happy with less and increase our capacity for moderation. Closely related is the exercise of deliberate delay of gratification. Epictetus suggested, do not indulge your desire the moment it arises. Say to your desire, wait a little. Let me see how long you will persist, and whether it is worth my while to indulge you. In contemporary practice, this might mean consciously waiting before buying something non-essential, delaying checking notifications on your phone, or deliberately pausing before seeking distractions when an uncomfortable feeling arises. This simple but powerful exercise strengthens the muscle of temperance. The practice of single tasking, devoting full attention to one activity at a time, is another valuable exercise in the age of chronic multitasking. Marcus Aurelius advised, don't let your mind wander. Keep it focused on what you are doing. This practice cultivates not only greater efficiency, but also attentional temperance, the ability to resist the constant fragmentation of our focus, one of the greatest challenges to temperance in the digital age. To integrate temperance more deeply into our lives, we can create daily rituals that promote balance and moderation. These might include regular periods of contemplative silence, mindful pauses during transitions between activities, or moments dedicated to gratitude for the simple things. As Epicurus observed, do not spoil what you have by desiring what you do not have. Remember that what you now have was once something you longed for. The key to incorporating these exercises into your daily life is to start modestly, perhaps with just one exercise practiced consistently, and then gradually expand. As Epictetus advised, begin with small things. An imperfect but regular practice is infinitely more valuable than an aspirational perfection never achieved. Remember that the Stoics themselves emphasized progress not perfection, and the cultivation of the virtues. The ancient wisdom of the Stoics finds remarkable confirmation in the findings of contemporary psychology. Temperance is deeply intertwined with our mental health. This connection is not merely correlational, but causal. Cultivating moderation and balance can be a powerful tool in preventing and managing conditions such as anxiety and depression. Anxiety, one of the psychological epidemics of our time, often feeds on a cycle of excessive worry about things beyond our control. When we cultivate Stoic temperance, especially through the dichotomy of control, we interrupt this cycle at its source. Recent studies in cognitive behavioral therapy confirm what the Stoics intuited. Learning to distinguish between productive and unproductive worries, and moderating our tendency to catastrophize, significantly reduces anxiety symptoms. Seneca, who wrote extensively about anxiety, which he called restlessness of the mind, observed, "We often suffer more in imagination than in reality." Temperance teaches us to moderate this tendency to amplify potential threats and anchors us in the present moment, where anxiety has much less power over us. Depression, on the other hand, often involves excessive rumination about the past or extremely negative views of the future. Stoic temperance, with its emphasis on balancing perspective and accepting what we cannot change, offers a natural antidote to these mental patterns. The Stoic technique of negative visualization, paradoxically, can help combat depression by cultivating gratitude for what we have and strengthening our resilience to face difficulties. Chronic stress, a common precursor to many mental health problems, thrives in environments of excess, overcommitment, overstimulation, and self-imposed pressure. Temperance invites us to question the cultural assumption that more is always better and to find a sustainable rhythm for our lives. As Marcus Aurelius advised, do not behave as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Death is hanging over you. While you live, while you can become good. Recent research on neuroplasticity and emotional regulation confirms what the Stoics proposed. Our mental habits literally shape our brains. Regularly practicing temperance, choosing balanced responses over extreme reactions, strengthens neural connections that facilitate self-control and psychological flexibility. A 2021 study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that individuals who regularly practiced emotional moderation techniques, similar to those prescribed by the Stoics, were more resilient in the face of stressful events and recovered more quickly from negative emotional states. One area where temperance becomes particularly relevant to contemporary mental health is in the use of technology and social media. The constant social comparison, the search for external validation, and the endless stream of information that characterize these platforms can significantly exacerbate anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem. Digital temperance, setting conscious limits on technology use, practicing periods of deliberate disconnection, and moderating news consumption emerges as an essential Stoic practice of the 21st century. Epictetus insisted that we must be vigilant about what we allow into our minds. Strikingly relevant advice in our age of unprecedented information consumption. Temperance teaches us to be careful curators of our mental diet, consciously choosing what deserves our limited attention rather than passively consuming whatever content is presented to us. Beyond technology, temperance applies to other habits that profoundly impact our mental health: sleep, eating, exercise, work, and recreation. In each domain, Stoic moderation guides us toward a sustainable middle ground between neglect and obsession. It's not about rigidly adhering to arbitrary rules, but about finding the balance that best serves individual flourishing, what the Stoics considered living in accordance with nature. It is important to recognize, however, that Stoic philosophy, valuable as it is no substitute for professional intervention when needed. Many mental health conditions have biological and neurological components that require appropriate medical treatment. The Stoics themselves greatly valued expert knowledge and would have been the first to recommend consulting a specialist when appropriate. Temperance, in this context, can help us to acknowledge without shame when we need outside help and integrate the help into a holistic approach to well-being. What the Stoic perspective offers, which beautifully complements contemporary approaches to mental health, is a view of the person as an active agent in his or her own healing, not just a passive patient receiving treatment, but a practitioner engaged in the ongoing cultivation of virtues such as temperance. As Chrysippus, an early Stoic, Observed, the health of the soul consists in having right and well-ordered beliefs. In the ancient world, Cato the Younger was often cited by the Stoics as an example of temperance in action. In an era of increasing extravagance and political corruption in Rome, Cato deliberately lived simply, often walking barefoot and wearing modest clothing, not as a show of austerity, but as an expression of his commitment to values that transcended the materialism of his time. This outward temperance reflected an inner discipline that allowed him to maintain unwavering principles in the face of enormous political pressure, a powerful example of how external and internal moderation reinforce each other. Seneca offers a fascinating and paradoxical example. As one of the wealthiest men in Rome, he certainly did not live in material deprivation, yet he regularly practiced periods of voluntary poverty, during which he lived with as little as possible. As he explained, set aside specific days to renounce the most basic things and become familiar with the bare minimum. Begin to cultivate a relationship with poverty. No one is worthy of God unless he has despised wealth. This practice allowed him to maintain perspective and avoid becoming overly attached to his material privilege, a form of temperance that is particularly relevant for many of us today. In the contemporary world, we find inspiring examples such as Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, known for her rigorous discipline, careful work-life balance, and ability to disagree firmly with her colleagues without personal animosity. Her famous friendship with Justice Antonin Scalia, despite deep ideological differences, exemplifies Stoic temperance in relationships, the ability to hold firm to principles without demonizing those who disagree. Environmentalist Wendell Berry offers another contemporary example of temperance in action. Rejecting both rampant consumerism and apocalyptic extremism, Berry practices and advocates a temperate path of local care, doing what is possible within our sphere of influence without succumbing to despair over global problems beyond our direct control. As he writes, be patient with whatever is unsolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves. This is a perfect expression of Stoic temperance applied to modern environmental challenges. Closer to our everyday experience, we can find temperance in action in ordinary people who have transformed their lives through this practice. Consider the case of Maria, a marketing executive who suffered from severe burnout due to relentless perfectionism and an inability to set boundaries. Through practicing Stoic principles, she learned to distinguish between what was and was not within her control, to set healthy boundaries at work, and to moderate her excessive self-criticism. Within a year, not only did her well-being improve dramatically, but her professional effectiveness did as well, illustrating the Stoic paradox that we often accomplish more when we put forth more balanced effort. Or consider John, who struggled with behavioral addiction to online gaming that was destroying his relationships and health. Instead of trying total abstinence, which had failed repeatedly, or resigning himself to his addiction, he applied principles of temperance, setting clear but realistic boundaries, practicing delayed gratification, and redirecting his energy toward activities that nurture genuine connection. Over time, he developed a more balanced relationship not just with gaming, but with pleasure and entertainment in general. In everyday life, temperance manifests itself in small but meaningful moments. The parent who takes a deep breath before responding to a provocative teenager, the professional who deliberately turns off work notifications during family dinner, the student who consciously alternates between focused study periods and genuine recovery breaks, the couple who approaches conflict with curiosity and respect rather than accusations and defensiveness. These examples remind us that temperance is not a philosophical abstraction, but a living practice that can transform our everyday experience. As Epictetus insisted, these things are not mere words, they are lived in practice. Observing temperance in action, both in historical figures and in the ordinary people around us, provides us with concrete models for our own practice and reminds us that this ancient virtue remains extraordinarily relevant in a modern world characterized by extremes. At the heart of Stoic ethics is a deeply integrated view of the virtues. For the Stoics, the four cardinal virtues, wisdom phronesis, temperance sophrosine, courage andreia, and justice dikaiosine, are not separate qualities to be cultivated independently, but interconnected aspects of a single excellent character. As Chrysippus, an early Stoic, put, "He who has one virtue has them all, and he who acts in accordance with one virtue acts in accordance with them all." This interconnection is not just theoretical, but profoundly practical. Temperance without wisdom could degenerate into mere rigidity or empty austerity, as we see in extreme forms of asceticism that lose sight of the greater purpose of self-control. Wisdom, phronesis, understood by the Stoics as practical knowledge of what is good, bad, and indifferent, guides our temperance, helping us discern when and how to exercise moderation in each unique situation. As Marcus Aurelius observed, nothing in excess is a universal motto, but determining what constitutes excess in any given context, whether an emotional expression, material consumption, work, or leisure, requires a practical wisdom that discerns the opportune moment, kairos, and the appropriate measure for each action. At the same time, temperance strengthens our capacity for practical wisdom. When our emotions and desires are moderated through the practice of temperance, our capacity for clear reasoning and balanced judgment expands significantly. As Seneca observed, anger hinders a mind from discerning truth. This mutually reinforcing relationship between temperance and wisdom creates a virtuous cycle of personal growth. The connection between temperance and courage, Andrea, is equally fascinating. At first glance, these virtues may seem to be opposites, one restraining, the other advancing. Yet the Stoics understood that true courage is not impulsive recklessness or reckless bravado, but rather the ability to face difficulties with appropriate fortitude. Temperance ensures that our courage is an expression of rational principles, not momentary impulses or wounded pride. Epictetus asked, "What makes us free from impediments and makes us masters of ourselves?" The Stoic answer is that only when our actions emanate from internally consistent principles, not from excessive emotional reactivity, are we truly free and courageous. Thus, temperance does not diminish courage, but refines and strengthens it. In turn, courage is essential to genuine temperance. Moderation often requires that we resist social pressure to overconsume, that we stick to our principles when it would be easier to compromise, that we set limits when others pressure us to compromise them. The courage to be different, to live with moderation in a culture of excess, is indispensable to the sustained practice of temperance. The relationship between temperance and justice, Dikeosine, is perhaps the most profound of all. For the Stoics, justice meant giving each person their due, treating others with fundamental fairness and respect. Temperance teaches us to moderate our impulses of self-preservation and self-promotion that often get in the way of treating others fairly. Marcus Aurelius often reflected on this connection. Accustom yourself to pay close attention to what others say, and try as much as possible to enter into the mind of the speaker. This practice of moderate attention to others, neither too much nor too little, is where temperance and justice meet. Furthermore, in a world of finite resources, temperance in our consumption becomes an act of justice toward others and future generations. As Seneca asked, is it really a question of poverty or of justice? Consuming only what we genuinely need, rather than what our unlimited desires might demand, creates space for a more equitable distribution of resources, an aspect of temperance that is deeply relevant to contemporary challenges like climate change and economic inequality. The unity of the virtues reminds us that we cannot genuinely cultivate temperance in isolation. As we practice moderation, we inevitably begin to develop greater wisdom, courage, and a sense of justice. Likewise, our progress in these other virtues naturally strengthens our capacity for temperance. This integrated view offers us an antidote to the narrow specialization and fragmentation that often characterize modern life. The Stoics invite us to view character development not as a checklist of isolated traits to be acquired, but as a holistic process of growth toward integral human excellence. Armed with this understanding of the interconnectedness of virtues, we are now prepared to consider how we can practically and gradually implement temperance in our daily lives. The journey to cultivating temperance is not a sudden transformation, but a gradual process of small, consistent changes that, over time, fundamentally reconfigure our relationship to desires, emotions, and actions. As Seneca wisely advised, we begin in small places. No one rises all at once from the depths to the heights. It is step by step that one advances. The Stoics understood deeply what modern psychology has confirmed. Attempts at radical, abrupt change often fail, because they fail to respect the incremental nature of true growth. Epictetus admonished his students, "Do not seek to have things happen as you wish, but desire that they happen as they do, and your life will go well. This same realistic attitude should guide our implementation of temperance. The first step on this gradual journey is to establish a consistent practice, however small. As Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, "Do not be overwhelmed by the magnitude of the task. Do what you can, for even a small action is a step forward." Maybe it's implementing a 5-second pause before responding when you feel irritation rising, or establishing a 15-minute daily period of quiet reflection, or committing to eating one meal a day mindfully and without distractions. The size of the step is less important than its consistency. The key to successful implementation is to identify priority areas where temperance will have the greatest impact on your life. For one person, this might be moderating emotional reactions in family relationships. For another, it might be establishing healthy boundaries at work. For a third, it might be balancing digital media consumption. Seneca advised, "Study your defects." Take note, in particular, of your deficiencies. Each person knows which parts of his body are most often threatened by illness. This honest self-assessment allows us to direct our efforts where they are most needed. A crucial and often overlooked aspect of gradual implementation is our attitude towards setbacks and failures. The Stoics, far from being relentless perfectionists, understood human nature with realistic compassion. Epictetus taught, "If you fail in your intentions, do not be ashamed to change your course. You're not obliged to plunge into the abyss. You can retreat." When we inevitably stumble in our practice of temperance, Stoicism invites us not to harsh self-criticism, but to a calm and determined fresh start. To sustain progress over time, it's helpful to create a structured plan with incremental milestones. For example, in the first 30 days, you might focus on simply observing and recording patterns of intemperance without trying to change them immediately, building awareness that is a foundation for change. In the next 30 days, you might implement small interventions in specific areas, such as taking mindful breaks before making impulsive decisions. In the third month, you might begin to create new rituals and habits that incorporate temperance more deeply into your daily routine. A powerful aspect of the Stoic approach is the use of concise maxims as mental anchors during this process. Phrases such as "respond, don't react," or "is it enough?" or "what is in my control here?" can be repeated like mantras during challenging moments, helping to activate the temperance muscle when it is most needed. Particularly valuable is Epictetus' advice to begin with smaller challenges. Begin with the small things. A little spilled oil, a little stolen wine. Say to yourself, "This is the price I pay for tranquility, for peace of mind." By practicing temperance in the small, everyday irritations and disappointments, we gradually develop the ability to maintain balance in larger, more challenging situations. The sustained practice of temperance will inevitably encounter resistance, both internal and external. Internally, ingrained habits and emotional conditioning will fight to maintain the status quo. Externally, a culture often oriented toward extremes may question, or even ridicule your pursuit of moderation. The Stoics remind us that this resistance is not an obstacle to our progress. It is part of the very training that strengthens our capacity for virtue. Perhaps the most important insight into the gradual implementation of temperance is to understand that it is not a linear journey with a clearly defined final destination. As Marcus Aurelius observed, there is no place you can go where there are no gods and their protection. There is no place where you cannot live according to the principles you profess. Temperance is not a state to be achieved once and for all, but an orientation toward life that continually deepens through practice. This view frees us from the all-or-nothing mentality that often sabotages efforts at personal growth. We understand that each small, successful act of moderation is a significant victory, not just a step towards some distant ideal, but a present expression of the virtue we seek to cultivate. In this way, the gradual implementation of temperance becomes not just a means to an end, but a satisfying practice in itself. At the end of this exploration of the virtue of temperance, we find ourselves not with a set of rigid rules for suppressing emotions or denying pleasures, but with an invitation to a more balanced, conscious, and satisfying way of inhabiting our humanity. As we have seen, Stoic temperance is not about feeling less, but about feeling better, with greater clarity, purpose, and balance. What emerges from this exploration is not a prescription for austerity, but an invitation of freedom. the freedom that comes from not being slaves to every impulse, desire, or passing emotion. As Seneca observed, it is better to conquer our passions than to be conquered by them. Temperance offers us the space to choose our responses rather than being driven by automatic reactions. In a world often characterized by extremes, from overconsumption to self-imposed deprivation, from frenetic hyperactivity to paralyzing procrastination, from emotional repression to unbridled indulgence, Stoic temperance remains a beacon of balance. It reminds us that there is a third path between these extremes, a path that honors both our capacity to feel deeply and our capacity to choose wisely. The invitation now is to implement at least one practice mentioned in this exploration. Perhaps it is a conscious pause before reacting emotionally, the morning exercise of preparing for the day's challenges, or simply a daily moment to consider. Am I exercising moderation and balance in my choices today? As Epictetus urged, don't talk so much about the kind of person a good man should be that person. Remember that Stoic philosophy was never conceived as an abstract academic exercise, but as a living practice, a path to becoming more fully human. Temperance, like all Stoic virtues, realizes its true value not in theory, but in everyday application. If this video resonated with you, please consider liking it and sharing it with someone who could benefit from this exploration of Stoic temperance. Each person who learns to cultivate greater emotional balance not only transforms their own life, but contributes to a world with more understanding and less reactivity. Subscribe to our channel for more content on practical Stoicism as it applies to anxiety, depression, relationships, and the everyday challenges of modern life. In our upcoming videos, we'll explore the other cardinal virtues, wisdom, courage, and justice, as well as specific Stoic techniques for dealing with chronic worry, intrusive thoughts, and interpersonal conflict. If you've already practiced some form of temperance in your life, please share your experience in the comments below. What challenges have you encountered? What benefits have you noticed? What techniques have worked best for you? Your story may be just the inspiration another viewer needs to begin their own journey toward balance. Remember, as Seneca said, progress is not made in a day. Temperance, like all virtues, grows through consistent practice over time. Don't strive for perfection, but for progress. Every small balancing act in challenging moments is a significant victory. Thank you for taking the time to explore Stoic temperance. Until our next philosophical gathering, may you find balance in your thoughts, moderation in your desires, and peace amidst life's inevitable storms. See you in the next video.